Reading books is something I also do sometimes. Ain't that crazy? Get out of here, music. This isn't the time for you. Shut up. Quiet, music. Quiet. Quiet, you. There you go. Shut up. Oh yeah, the fart needs to go. Thank you, Minnie. The fart also has to go. Goodbye, farts. Goodbye. Goodbye forever. Until next time. But yes, reading books, that's something I do, and that is something I should have done 2 hours ago or so, but I got carried away with Racing Lagoon. Maybe I should get less exciting games to play before reading. Maybe that's a good idea. Isn't it? I don't suppose that was a good plan of me. It was kind of silly of me, in fact. Oh well, but yeah, so today we'll be reading The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I don't know how much of this I'll read because I'm kind of tired, but we'll read some of it. Let me fire up some music real fast before we get this started. And I don't know, I probably won't be doing voices and stuff because that seems like a lot of voices to do and I'll forget the voices and it's just not worth it. So I'll just kind of, read. What kind of music do we want today? Does strut brooding, no, funky struts in Devils and Angels sound nice? I can't hear the... Nah, it's a bit too exciting. A bit too exciting, this. Some lonely Stromboli in Honky Tonk. Nah, something more chill. Slow funk, but it's intense. And marimba phone. What's a good thing to have? Reggae. Wary reggae with grit. Something whimsy. Yeah, I was thinking something maybe. Adventure. Romantic with mallets. That's a bit too distracting. Dream sleep. Lower tempo, perhaps? Nah, this is a bit too exciting. Sophisticated adventure. Boogie 2. No, Boogie is not gonna chase. Upbeat, default. Countdown. Not bad. This is pretty alright. Make it loopable. And 5 minutes long. The piano riff. Make the pianos quiet. No, I'm just changing around the instruments, so don't worry about it. This is fine. Whoa, what the hell was that? Purum. New USB device detected. Windows 98. What the hell? Oh, my controller. I don't think Windows 98 is gonna understand what a 8-bit DOE Ultimate 2 is. Okay, I got my water. I got my stuff. I got my fiddle thingy. Anyway, I should just start reading, I suppose. Kindle, wake up. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Far out in the uncharted backwaters of the unfashionable end of the western spiral arm of the galaxy lies a small, unregarded yellow sun. Orbiting this at a distance of roughly 98 million miles is an utterly insignificant little blue-green planet whose ape-descended life forms are so amazingly primitive that they still think digital watches are a pretty neat idea. This planet has, or rather had, a problem, which was this. Most of the people living on it were unhappy for pretty much most of the time. Many solutions were suggested for this problem, but most of these were largely concerned with the movements of small green pieces of paper, which is odd because on the whole it wasn't the small green pieces of paper that were unhappy. And so the problem remained. Lots of the people were mean, and most of them were miserable. Even the ones with digital watches. Many were increasingly of the opinion that they had all made a big mistake in coming down from the trees in the first place, and some said that even the trees had been a bad move, and that no one should ever have left the oceans. And then one Thursday, nearly 2,000 years after one man had been nailed to a tree for saying how great it would be to be nice to people for a change, a girl sitting on her own in a small cafe in Rickmansworth suddenly realized what it was that had been going wrong all this time, and she finally knew how the world could be made a good and happy place. This time it was right, it would work, and no one would have to get nailed to anything. Sadly, however, before she could get to a phone to tell anyone about it, a terrible, stupid catastrophe occurred, and the idea was lost forever. This is not her story, but it is the story of that terrible, stupid catastrophe and some of its consequences. It is also the story of a book called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Not an Earth book, never published on Earth, and until the terrible catastrophe occurred, never seen or even heard of by any Earthman. Nevertheless, a wholly remarkable book. In fact, it was probably the most remarkable book ever to come out of the great publishing corporations of Ursa Minor, of which no Earthman had ever heard either. Not only is it a wholly remarkable book, it is also a highly successful one, more popular than the Celestial Home Care Omnibus, better selling than 53 More Things to Do in Zero Gravity, and more controversial than Ulan's Culifid's trilogy of philosophical blockbusters, Where God Went Wrong, Some More of God's Greatest Mistakes, and Who Is This God Person Anyway? In many of the more relaxed civilizations on the outer eastern rim of the galaxy, The Hitchhiker's Guide has already supplanted the great Encyclopedia Galactica as the standard repository of all knowledge and wisdom, for though it has many omissions and contains much that is apocryphal, or at least wildly inaccurate, it scores over the older, more pedestrian work in two important respects. First, it is slightly cheaper, and second, it has the words "Don't Panic" inscribed in large friendly letters on its cover. But the story of this terrible, stupid Thursday, the story of its extraordinary consequences, and the story of how these consequences are inextricably intertwined with this remarkable book begins very simply. It begins with a house. Chapter 1. The house stood on a slight rise just on the edge of the village. It stood on its own and looked out over a broad spread of West Country farmland. Not a remarkable house by any means. It was about 30 years old, squattish, squarish, made of brick, and had 4 windows set in the front of a size and proportion which more or less exactly failed to please the eye. The only person for whom the house was in any way special was Arthur Dent, and that was only because it happened to be the one he lived in. He had lived in it for about 3 years, ever since he had moved out of London, because it made him nervous and irritable. He was about 30 as well, tall, dark-haired, and never quite at ease with himself. The thing that used to worry him most was the fact that people always used to ask him what he was looking so worried about. He worked in local radio, which he always used to tell his friends was a lot more interesting than they probably thought. It was, too, most of his friends worked in advertising. On Wednesday night it had rained very heavily. The lane was wet and muddy, but the Thursday morning sun was bright and clear as it shone on Arthur Dent's house for what was to be the last time. It hadn't properly registered yet with Arthur that the council wanted to knock it down and build a bypass instead. At 8 o'clock on Thursday morning, Arthur didn't feel very good. He woke up blearily, got up, wandered blearily around his room, opened the window, saw a bulldozer, found his slippers, and stomped off to the bathroom to wash. Toothpaste on the brush, so scrub. Shaving mirror pointing at the ceiling. He adjusted it. For a moment it reflected a second bulldozer through the bathroom window. Properly adjusted, it reflected Arthur Dent's bristles. He shaved them off, washed, dried, and stomped off to the kitchen to find something pleasant to put in his mouth. Kettle, plug, fridge, milk, coffee, yawn. The word bulldozer wandered through his mind for a moment in search of something to connect with. The bulldozer outside the kitchen window was quite a big one. He stared at it. Yellow, he thought, and stomped off back to his bedroom to get dressed. Passing the bathroom, he stopped to drink a large glass of water, and another. He began to suspect that he was hungover. Why was he hungover? Had he been drinking the night before? He supposed that he must have been. He caught a glint in the shaving mirror. Yellow, he thought, and stomped on to the bedroom. He stood and thought. The pub, he thought. Oh dear, the pub. He vaguely remembered being angry. Angry about something that seemed important. He'd been telling people about it at great length. He rather suspected his clearest visual recollection was of glazed looks on other people's faces. Something about a new bypass he'd just found out about. It had been in the pipeline for months, only no one seemed to have known about it. Ridiculous. He took a swig of water. It would sort itself out. He decided no one wanted a bypass. The council didn't have a leg to stand on. It would sort itself out. God, what a terrible hangover it had earned him, though. He looked at himself in the wardrobe mirror. He stuck out his tongue. Yellow, he thought. The word yellow wandered through his mind in search of something to connect with. 15 seconds later, he was out of the house and lying in front of a big yellow bulldozer that was advancing up his garden path. Mr. L. Proser was, as they say, only human. In other words, he was a carbon-based bipedal life form descended from an ape. More specifically, he was 40, fat and shabby, and worked for the local council. Curiously enough, though, he didn't know it. He was also a direct male line descendant of Genghis Khan, though intervening generations and racial mixing had so juggled his genes that he had no discernible Mongoloid characteristics, and the only vestiges left in Mr. L. Proser of his mighty ancestry were a pronounced stoutness about the turn and a predilection for little fur hats. He was by no means a great warrior. In fact, he was a nervous, worried man. Today, he was particularly nervous and worried because something had gone seriously wrong with his job, which was to see that Arthur Dent's house got cleared out of the way before the day was out. Come off it, Mr. Dent, he said. You can't win. You know, you can't lie in front of the bulldozer indefinitely. He tried to make his eyes blaze fiercely, but they just wouldn't do it. Arthur lay in the mud and squelched at him. I'm game, he said. We'll see who rusts first. I'm afraid you're going to have to accept it, said Mr. Proser, gripping his fur hat and rolling it round the top of his head. This bypass has got to be built and is going to be built. First I've heard of it, said Arthur. Why has it got to be built? Mr. Proser shook his finger at him for a bit, then stopped and put it away again. What do you mean, why has it got to be built? He said. It's a bypass. You've got to build bypasses. Bypasses are devices that allow some people to dash from point A to point B very fast, while other people dash from point B to point A very fast. People living at point C, being a point directly in between, are often given to wonder what's so great about point A that so many people from point B are so keen to get there, and what's so great about point B that so many people from point A are so keen to get there. They often wish that people would just once and for all work out where the hell they wanted to be. Mr. Proser wanted to be at point D. Point D wasn't anywhere in particular. It was just any convenient point a very long way from points A, B, and C. He would have a nice little cottage at point D, with access over the door, and spend a pleasant amount of time at point E, which would be the nearest pub to point D. His wife, of course, wanted climbing roses, but he wanted access. He didn't know why. He just liked access. He flushed hotly under the derisive grins of the bulldozer drivers. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, but it was equally uncomfortable on each. Obviously, somebody had been appallingly incompetent, and he hoped to God it wasn't him. Mr. Proser said, "You were quite entitled to make any suggestions or protests at the appropriate time, you know." "Appropriate time?" hooted Arthur. "Appropriate time? The first I knew about it was when a workman arrived at my home yesterday. I asked him if he'd come to clean the windows, and he said no. He'd come to demolish the house. He didn't tell me straight away, of course. Oh no. First he wiped a couple of windows and charged me a $5. Then he told me." "But Mr. Dent, the plans have been available in the local planning office for the last 9 months." "Oh yes, well, as soon as I heard, I went straight round to see them yesterday afternoon. You hadn't exactly gone out of your way to call attention to them, had you? I mean, like actually telling anybody or anything." "But the plans were on display." "On display? I eventually had to go down to the cellar to find them." "That's the display department." "With a flashlight." "Ah, well, the lights had probably gone." "So had the stairs." "But look, you found the notice, didn't you?" "Yes," said Arthur. "Yes, I did. It was on display in the bottom of a locked filing cabinet stuck in a disused lavatory with a sign on the door saying, 'Beware of the leopard.'" A cloud passed overhead. It cast a shadow over Arthur Dent as he lay propped up on his elbow in the cold mud. It cast a shadow over Arthur Dent's house. Mr. Proser frowned at it. "It's not as if it's a particularly nice house," he said. "I'm sorry, but I happen to like it." "You like the bypass?" "Oh, shut up," said Arthur Dent. "Shut up and go away, and take your bloody bypass with you. You haven't got a leg to stand on, and you know it." Mr. Proser's mouth opened and closed a couple of times, while his mind was for a moment filled with inexplicable but terribly attractive visions of Arthur Dent's house being consumed with fire, and Arthur himself running screaming from the blazing ruin, with at least 3 hefty spears protruding from his back. Mr. Proser was often bothered by visions like these, and they made him feel very nervous. He stuttered for a moment and then pulled himself together. "Mr. Dent," he said. "Hello, yes?" said Arthur. "Some factual information for you. Have you any idea how much damage that bulldozer would suffer if I just let it roll straight over you?" "How much?" said Arthur. "None at all," said Mr. Proser, and stormed nervously off, wondering why his brain was filled with 1,000 hairy horsemen all shouting at him. By a curious coincidence, none at all is exactly how much suspicion the ape descendant Arthur Dent had that one of his closest friends was not descended from an ape, but was in fact from a small planet somewhere in the vicinity of Betelgeuse, and not from Guildford as he usually claimed. Arthur Dent had never ever suspected this. This friend of his had first arrived on the planet Earth some 15 Earth years previously, and he had worked hard to blend himself into Earth society, with, it must be said, some success. For instance, he had spent some 15 years pretending to be an out-of-work actor, which was plausible enough. He had made one careless blunder, though, because he had skimped a bit on his preparatory speech, or research. The information he had gathered had led him to choose the name Ford Prefect as being nicely inconspicuous. He was not conspicuously tall. His features were striking but not conspicuously handsome. His hair was wiry and gingerish and brushed backward from his temples. His skin seemed to be pulled backward from the nose. There was something very slightly odd about him, but it was difficult to say what it was. Perhaps it was that his eyes didn't seem to blink often enough, and when you talked to him for any length of time, your eyes began involuntarily to water on his behalf. Perhaps it was that he smiled slightly too broadly and gave people the unnerving impression that he was about to go for their neck. He struck most of the friends he had made on Earth as an eccentric but a harmless one. An unruly boozer with some oddish habits. For instance, he would often gatecrash university parties, get badly drunk, and start making fun of any astrophysicist he could find till he got thrown out. Sometimes he would get seized with oddly distracted moods and stare into the sky as if hypnotized until someone asked him what he was doing. Then he would start guiltily for a moment, relax, and grin. "Oh, just looking for flying saucers," he would joke. And everyone would laugh and ask him what sort of flying saucers he was looking for. "Green ones," he would reply with a wicked grin, laugh wildly for a moment, and then suddenly lunge for the nearest bar and buy an enormous round of drinks. Evenings like this usually ended badly. Ford would get out of his skull on whiskey, huddle in a corner with some girl, and explain to her in the slurred phrases that honestly the color of the flying saucer didn't matter that much really. Thereafter, staggering semi-paralytic down the night streets, he would often ask passing policemen if they knew the way to Beetlejuice. The policeman would usually say something like, "Don't you think it's about time you went off home, sir?" "I'm trying to, baby, I'm trying to," is what Ford invariably replied to on these occasions. In fact, what he was really looking for when he stared distractedly into the sky was any kind of flying saucer at all. The reason he said green was that green was the traditional space livery of the Beetlejuice trading scouts. Ford Prefect was desperate that any flying saucer at all would arrive soon enough, because 15 years is a long time to get stranded anywhere, particularly somewhere as mind-bogglingly dull as the Earth. Ford wished that a flying saucer would arrive soon because he knew how to flag flying saucers down and get lifts from them. He knew how to see the marvels of the universe for less than $30 Altarian a day. In fact, Ford Prefect was a roving researcher for that wholly remarkable book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Human beings are great adapters, and by lunchtime, life in the environs of Arthur's house had settled into a steady routine. It was Arthur's accepted role to lie squelching in the mud, making occasional demands to see his lawyer, his mother, or a good book. It was Mr. Prowser's accepted role to tackle Arthur with occasional new ploys such as the "for the public good" talk or the "March of Progress" talk, the "they knocked my house down once, you know, never looked back" talk, and various other cajoleries and threats. And it was the bulldozer driver's accepted role to sit around drinking coffee and experimenting with union regulations to see how they could turn the situation to their financial advantage. The Earth moved slowly in its diurnal course. The sun was beginning to dry out the mud that Arthur lay in. A shadow moved across him again. "Hello, Arthur," said the shadow. Arthur looked up, squinting into the sun, and was startled to see Ford Prefect standing above him. "Ford, hello, how are you?" "Fine," said Ford. "Look, are you busy?" "Am I busy?" exclaimed Arthur. "Well, I've just got all these bulldozers and things to lie in front of because they'll knock my house down if I don't. But other than that, well, no, not especially." "Why?" They don't have sarcasm in Beetlejuice, and Ford Prefect often failed to notice it unless he was concentrating. He said, "Good. Is there anywhere we can talk?" "What?" said Arthur Dent. For a few seconds, Ford seemed to ignore him, and stared fixedly into the sky like a rabbit trying to get run over by a car. Then suddenly he squatted down beside Arthur. "We've got to talk," he said urgently. "Fine," said Arthur. "Talk." "And drink," said Ford. "It is vitally important that we talk and drink, now. We'll go to the pub in the village." He looked into the sky again, nervous, expectant. "Look, you don't understand," shouted Arthur. He pointed at Prowser. "That man wants to knock my house down." Ford glanced at him, puzzled. "Well, he can do it while you're away, can't he?" he asked. "But I don't want him to." "Ah, Look, what's the matter with you, Ford? Said Arthur. Nothing. Nothing's the matter. Listen to me. I've got to tell you the most important thing you've ever heard. I've got to tell you now, and I've got to tell you in the saloon bar of the Horse and the Groom. But why? Because you're going to need a very stiff drink. Ford stared at Arthur, and Arthur was astonished to find his will beginning to weaken. He didn't realize that this was because of an old drinking game that Ford learned to play in the hyperspace ports that served the Madronite mining belts from the star system of Orion Beta. The game was not unlike the Earth game called Indian Wrestling and was played like this. Two contestants would sit either side of a table with a glass in front of each of them. Between them would be placed a bottle of Jank's Spirit, as immortalized in that ancient Orion mining song, "Oh, don't give me none more of that old Jank Spirit. No, don't you give me none more of that old Jank Spirit, for my head will fly, my tongue will lie, my eyes will fry, and I may die. Won't you pour me one more of that sinful old Jank Spirit?" Each of the two contestants would then concentrate their will on the bottle and attempt to tip it and pour a spirit into the glass of his opponent, who would then have to drink it. The bottle would then be refilled. The game would be played again and again. Once you started to lose, you would probably keep losing, because one of the effects of Jank's Spirit is to depress psychic power. As soon as a predetermined quantity had been consumed, the final loser would have to perform a forfeit, which was usually obscenely biological. Ford Prefect usually played to lose. Ford stared at Arthur, who began to think that perhaps he did want to go to the House and Groom after all. "But what about my house?" he asked plaintively. Ford looked across to Mr. Proser, and suddenly a wicked thought struck him. "He wants to knock your house down?" "Yes, he wants to build... And he can't because you're lying in front of his bulldozer?" "Yes, and..." "I'm sure you can come to some arrangement," said Ford. "Excuse me," he shouted. Mr. Proser, who was arguing with a spokesman for the bulldozer drivers about whether or not Arthur then constituted a mental health hazard, and how much they should get paid if he did, looked around. He was surprised and slightly alarmed to see that Arthur had company. "Yes, hello," he called. "Has Mr. Dent come to his senses yet?" "Can we for the moment," called Ford, "assume that he hasn't?" "Well," sighed Mr. Proser. "And can we also assume," said Ford, "that he's going to be staying here all day?" So all your men are going to be standing around all day doing nothing?" Could be. "Well, if you're resigned to doing that anyway, you don't actually need him to lie here all the time, do you?" "What?" "You don't," said Ford patiently, "actually need him here." Mr. Proser thought about this. "Well, no, not as such," he said. "Not exactly need." Proser was worried. He thought that one of them wasn't making a lot of sense. Ford said, "So, if you would just, to take it as read that he's actually here, then he and I could slip off down to the pub for half an hour? How does that sound?" Mr. Proser thought it sounded perfectly potty. "That sounds perfectly reasonable," he said in a reassuring tone of voice, wondering who he was trying to reassure. "And if you want to pop off for a quick one yourself later on," said Ford, "we can always cover for you in return." "Thank you very much," he said Mr. Proser, who no longer knew how to play this at all. "Thank you very much. Yes, that's very kind." He frowned, then smiled, then tried to do both at once, failed, grasped hold of his fur hat, and rolled it fitfully round the top of his head. He could only assume that he had just won. "So," continued Ford Prefect, "if you would just like to come over here and lie down..." "What?" said Mr. Proser. "Ah, I'm sorry," said Ford. "Perhaps I hadn't made myself fully clear. Somebody's got to lie down in front of the bulldozers, haven't they? Or there won't be anything to stop them driving into Mr. Dent's house, will there?" "What?" said Mr. Proser again. "It's very simple," said Ford. "My client, Mr. Dent, says that he will stop lying there in the mud on the sole condition that you come and take over from him." What are you talking about? Said Arthur, but Ford nudged him with his shoe to be quiet. You want me, said Prowser, spelling out this new thought to himself, to come and lie there. Yes. In front of the bulldozer. Yes. Instead of Mr. Dent. Yes. In the mud. In, as you say, the mud. As soon as Mr. Prowser realized that he was substantially the loser after all, it was as if a weight lifted itself off his shoulders. This was more like the world as he knew it. He sighed. In return for which you will take Mr. Dent with you down to the pub. That's it, said Ford. That is it exactly. Mr. Prowser took a few nervous steps forward and stopped. Promise? He said. Promise, said Ford. He turned to Arthur. Come on, he said to him. Get up and let the man lie down. Arthur stood up, feeling as if he was in a dream. Ford beckoned to Prowser, who sadly, awkwardly sat down in the mud. He felt that his whole life was some kind of dream, and he sometimes wondered whose it was and whether they were enjoying it. The mud folded itself round his bottom and his arms and oozed into his shoes. Ford looked at him severely. And no sneaky knocking Mr. Dent's house down while he's away, all right? He said. The mere thought, growled Mr. Prowser, hadn't even begun to speculate. He continued, settling himself back, about the merest possibility of crossing my mind. He saw the bulldozer drivers' union representative approaching and let his head sink back and close his eyes. He was trying to marshal his arguments for proving that he did not know how to constitute a mental health hazard himself. He was far from certain about this. His mind seemed to be full of noises, horses, smoke, and the stench of blood. This always happened when he felt miserable or put upon, and he had never been able to explain it to himself. In a high dimension of which we know nothing, the mighty Khan bellowed with rage, but Mr. Prowser only trembled slightly and whimpered. He began to feel little pricks of water behind his eyelids, bureaucratic cock-ups, angry men lying in mud, indecipherable strangers handing out inexplicable humiliation, and an unidentified army of horsemen laughing at him in his head. What a day! What a day, Fort Prefect. Fort Prefect knew that it didn't matter a pair of dingo kidneys whether Arthur's house got knocked down or not now. Wait, what? Arthur remained very worried. But can we trust him, he said. Myself I trust to the end of the earth, said Ford. Oh yes, said Arthur. And how far is that? About 12 minutes away, said Ford. Come on, I need a drink. Alright then. Let me give it a little stretch. Those are words. Alright. Chapter 2. Here's what the Encyclopedia Galactica has to say about alcohol. It says that alcohol is a colorless, volatile liquid formed by the fermentation of sugars and also notes its intoxicating effect on certain carbon-based life forms. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy also mentions alcohol. It says that the best drink in existence is the Pan-Galactic Gargle Blaster. It says that the effects of drinking a Pan-Galactic Gargle Blaster is like having your brain smashed out by a slice of lemon wrapped around a large gold brick. The guide also tells you on which planets the best Pan-Galactic Gargle Blasters are mixed, how much you can expect to pay for one, and what voluntary organizations exist to help you rehabilitate afterwards. The guide even tells you how you can mix one yourself. Take the juice from one bottle of the old jank spirit, it says. Pour into it 1 measure of water from the seas of Centraginus 5. That's Centraginian seawater, it says. Oh, those Centraginian fish. Allow 3 cubes of Arcturan Mega Gin to melt into the mixture. It must be properly iced, or the benzene is lost. Allow 4 liters of Phalian marsh gas to bubble through it, in memory of all those happy bikers who have died of pleasure in the marshes of Phalia. Over the back of a silver spoon float a measure of qualectin hypermint extract, redolent of all the heady odors of the dark qualectin zones, subtle, sweet, and mystic. Drop in the tooth of an Algolian sun tiger. Watch it dissolve, spreading the fires of the Algolian suns deep into the heart of the drink. Sprinkle Zamphor. Add an olive. Drink, but very carefully. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy sells rather better than the Encyclopedia Galactica. 6 pints of bitter, said Ford Prefect to the barman of the Horse and Groom. And quickly, please. The world's about to end. The barman of the Horse and Groom didn't deserve this sort of treatment. He was a dignified old man. He pushed his glasses up his nose and blinked at Ford Prefect. Ford ignored him and stared out the window. So the barman looked instead at Arthur, who shrugged helplessly and said nothing. So the barman said, "Oh yes, sir. Nice weather for it," and started pulling pints. He tried again. "Going to watch the match this afternoon then?" Ford glanced round at him. No point," he said, and looked back out the window. "What's that, foregone conclusion then, you reckon, sir?" said the barman. "Arsenal without a chance?" No, said Ford. "It's just that the world's about to end." "Oh, yes, sir, so you said," said the barman, looking over his glasses this time at Arthur. "Lucky escape for Arsenal if it did." Ford looked back at him, genuinely surprised. "No, not really," he said. He frowned. The barman breathed in heavily. "There you are, sir. 6 pints," he said. Arthur smiled at him wanly and shrugged again. He turned and smiled wanly at the rest of the pub, just in case any of them had heard what was going on. None of them had, and none of them could understand what he was smiling at them for. A man sitting next to Ford at the bar looked at the 2 men, looked at the 6 pints, did a swift burst of mental arithmetic, arrived at an answer he liked, and grinned a stupeful, hopeful grin at them. "Get off," said Ford. "They're ours," giving him a look that would have made an Algolian sun tiger get on with what it was doing. Ford slapped a 5-pound note on the bar. He said, "Keep the change." "What, from a $5? Thank you, sir." "You've got 10 minutes left to spend it." The barman decided simply to walk away for a bit. "Ford," said Arthur, "would you please tell me what the hell is going on?" "Drink up," said Ford. "You've got 3 pints to get through." "3 pints," said Arthur. "At lunchtime?" The man next to Ford grinned and nodded happily. Ford ignored him. He said, "Time is an illusion. Lunchtime doubly so." "Very deep," said Arthur. "You should send that in to the Reader's Digest. They got a page for people like you." "Drink up." "Why 3 pints all of a sudden?" "Muscle relaxant. You'll need it." "Muscle relaxant?" "Muscle relaxant." Arthur stared into his beer. "Did I do anything wrong today?" he said. "Or has the world always been like this and I've been too wrapped up in myself to notice?" "All right," said Ford. "I'll try to explain. How long have we known each other?" "How long?" Arthur thought. About 5 years, maybe 6, he said. Most of it seemed to make some kind of sense at the time. "All right," said Ford. "How would you react if I said that I'm not from Guildford after all, but from a small planet somewhere in the vicinity of Betelgeuse?" Arthur shrugged in a so-so sort of way. "I don't know," he said, taking a pull of beer. "Why do you think it's the sort of thing you're likely to say?" Ford gave up. It really wasn't worth bothering at the moment. What with the world being about to end, he just said, "Drink up." He added, perfectly factually, "The world's about to end." Arthur gave the rest of the pub another wan smile. The rest of the pub frowned at him. A man waved at him to stop smiling at them and mind his own business. "This must be Thursday," said Arthur to himself, sinking low over his beer. "I never could get the hang of Thursdays." Chapter 3. On this particular Thursday, something was moving quietly through the ionosphere many miles above the surface of the planet. Several somethings, in fact. Several dozen huge yellow chunky slab-like somethings, huge as office blocks, silent as birds. They soared with ease, basking in electromagnetic rays from the star Sol, biding their time, grouping, preparing. The planet beneath them was almost perfectly oblivious to their presence, which was just how they wanted it for the moment. The huge yellow something went unnoticed at Goonhilly. They passed over Cape Canaveral without a blip. Woomera and Chodrel Bank looked straight through them, which was a pity because it was exactly the sort of thing they'd been looking for all these years. The only place it registered at all was on a small black device called the Sub-Ether Sensomatic, which winked away quietly to itself. It nestled in the darkness inside the leather satchel which Ford Prefect habitually wore slung around his neck. Hold on, I lost my track. The contents of Ford Prefect's satchel were quite interesting, in fact, and would have made any Earth physicist's eyes pop out of his head, which is why he always concealed them by keeping a couple of dog-eared scripts for plays he pretended he was auditioning for stuffed in the top. Besides the Sub-Ether Sensomatic and the scripts, he had an electronic thumb, a short squat black rod, smooth and matte with a couple of flat switches and dials at one end. He also had a device that looked rather like a largest electronic calculator. This had about 100 tiny flat press buttons and a screen about 4 inches square on which any one of a million pages could be summoned at a moment's notice. It looked insanely complicated, and this was one of the reasons why the snug plastic cover it fitted into had the words "Don't Panic" printed on it in large friendly letters. The other reason was that this device was in fact the most remarkable of all books ever to come out of the great publishing corporations of Ursa Minor, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The reason why it was published in the form of a micro-sub-meson electronic component is that if it were printed in a normal book form, an interstellar hitchhiker would require several inconveniently large buildings to carry it around in. Beneath that, in Port Prefect's satchel, were a few ballpoints, a notepad, and a largish bath towel from Marks & Spencer. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy has a few things to say on the subject of towels. A towel, it says, is about the most massively useful thing an interstellar hitchhiker can have. Partly, it has great practical value. You can wrap it around you for warmth as you bound across the cold moons of Jagland Beta. You can lie on it on the brilliant marble sanded beaches of Centragonus 5, inhaling the heady sea vapors. You can sleep under it beneath the stars which shine so redly on the desert world of Kakrafun. Use it to sail a mini-raft down the slow, heavy river Moth. Wet it for use in hand-to-hand combat. Wrap it round your head to ward off noxious fumes, or avoid the gaze of the ravenous bug-bladder beast of Trial. A mind-bogglingly stupid animal. It assumes that if you can't see it, it can't see you. Daft as a brush, but very, very ravenous. You can wave your towel in emergencies as a distress signal, and of course dry yourself off with it if it still seems to be clean enough. More importantly, a towel has immense psychological value. For some reason, if a strag being non-hitchhiker, discovers that the hitchhiker has his towel with him, he will automatically assume that he is also in possession of a toothbrush, washcloth, soap, tin of biscuits, flask, compass, map, ball string, gnat spray, wet weather gear, spacesuit, etc., etc. Furthermore, the strag will then happily lend the hitchhiker any of these or a dozen other items that the hitchhiker might accidentally have lost. What the strag will think is that any man who can hitch the length and breadth of the galaxy, rough it, slum it, struggle against terrible odds, win through, and still know where his towel is clearly a man to be reckoned with. Hence, a phrase that has passed into hitchhiking slang as in, "Hey, you sass that hoopy Ford Prefect? There's a fruit who really knows where his towel is." Sass, no, be aware of, meet, have sex with, hoopy. Really together guy, fruit. Really amazingly together guy. Nestling quietly on the top of the towel in Fort Prefect's satchel, the sub-etha Sensomatic began to wink more quickly. Miles above the surface of the planet, the huge yellow somethings began to fan out. At Jodrell Bank, someone decided it was time for a nice, relaxing cup of tea. You got a towel with you? Said Ford suddenly to Arthur. Arthur, struggling through his third pint, looked round at him. Why? What? No. Should I have? He had given up being surprised. There didn't seem to be any point any longer. Ford clicked his tongue in irritation. Drink up, he urged. At that moment, the dull sound of a rumbling crash from outside filtered through the low murmur of the pub. Through the sound of the jukebox, through the sound of the man next to Ford hiccuping over the whiskey Ford had eventually bought him. Arthur choked on his beer, leaped to his feet. What's that? He yelped. Don't worry, said Ford. They haven't started yet. Thank God for that, said Arthur and relaxed. It's probably just your house being knocked down, said Ford, downing his last pint. What? Shouted Arthur. Suddenly Ford's spell was broken. Arthur looked wildly around him and ran to the window. My God, they are! They're knocking my house down! What the hell am I doing in the pub, Ford? It hardly makes any difference at this stage, said Ford. Let them have their fun. Fun? Yelped Arthur. Fun! He quickly checked out the window again. That they were talking about the same thing. Damn, they're fun, he hooted, and ran out of the pub, furiously waving a nearly empty beer glass. He made no friends at all in the pub that lunchtime. Stop, you vandals! You home wreckers! Bawled Arthur. You half-crazed Visgos! Stop, will ya? Ford would have to go after him. Turning quickly to the barman, he asked for 4 packets of peanuts. There you are, sir, said the barman, slapping the packets on the bar. 28 pence, if you'd be so kind. Ford was very kind. He gave the barman another £5 note and told him to keep the change. The barman looked at it and then looked at Ford. He suddenly shivered. He experienced a momentary sensation that he didn't understand because no one on Earth had ever experienced it before. In moments of great stress, every life form that exists gives out a tiny subliminal signal. This signal simply communicates an exact and almost pathetic sense of how far that being is from that place of birth. On Earth, it is never possible to be farther than 16,000 miles from your birthplace, which really isn't very far, so such signals are too minute to be noticed. Fort Prefect was at this moment under great stress, and he was born 600 light-years away in the near vicinity of Beetlejuice. The barman reeled for a moment, hit by a shocking, incomprehensible sense of distance. He didn't know what it meant, but he looked at Fort Prefect with a new sense of respect, almost awe. Are you serious, sir? He said in a small whisper, which had the effect of silencing the pub. You think the world is going to end? Yes, said Ford. But this afternoon... Ford had recovered himself. He was at his flippest. Yes, he said gaily. In less than 2 minutes, I would estimate. The barman couldn't believe this conversation he was having, but he couldn't believe the sensation he had just had earlier either. Isn't there anything we can do about it then? He said. No, nothing, said Ford, stuffing the peanuts into his pocket. Someone in the hushed bar suddenly laughed raucously at how stupid everyone had become. The man sitting next to Ford was a bit sozzled by now. His eyes weaved their way up to Ford. I thought, he said, that if the world was going to end, we were meant to lie down or put a paper bag over our head or something. If you like, yes, said Ford. And that's what they told us in the army, said the man, and his eyes began the long trek backward towards his whiskey. Will that help? Asked the barman. No, said Ford, and gave him a friendly smile. Excuse me, he said, I've got to go. With a wave, he left. The pub was silent for a moment longer, and then, embarrassingly enough, the man with the raucous laugh did it again. The girl he had dragged along to the pub with him had grown to loathe him dearly over the last hour, and it would probably have been a great satisfaction to her to know that in a minute and a half or so he would suddenly evaporate into a whiff of hydrogen, ozone, and carbon monoxide. However, when the moment came, she would be too busy evaporating herself to notice it. The barman cleared his throat. He heard himself say, "Last orders, please." The huge yellow machines began to sink downward and to move faster. Ford knew they were there. This wasn't the way he had wanted it. Running up the lane, Arthur had nearly reached his house. He didn't notice how cold it had suddenly become. He didn't notice the wind. He didn't notice the sudden irrational squall of rain. He didn't notice anything but the caterpillar bulldozers crawling over the rubble that had been his home. "You barbarians!" he yelled. "I'll sue the council for every penny it's got. I'll have you hung, drawn, and quartered, and whipped, and boiled until you've had enough." Ford was running after him very fast. Very, very fast. "And then I will do it again," yelled Arthur. "And when I've finished, I will take all the little bits, and I will jump on them." Arthur didn't notice that the men were running from the bulldozers. He didn't notice that Mr. Proser was staring hectically into the sky. What Mr. Proser had noticed was that huge yellow somethings were screaming through the clouds. Impossibly huge yellow somethings. "And I will carry on jumping on them," yelled Arthur, still running, "until I get blisters, or I can think of anything even more unpleasant to do." And then Arthur tripped and fell headlong, rolled, and landed flat on his back. At last he noticed that something was going on. His finger shot upward. "What the hell's that?" he shrieked. Whatever it was raced across the sky in its monstrous yellowness, tore the sky apart with mind-boggling noise, and leaped off into the distance, leaving the gaping air to shed behind it with a bang that drove your ears 6 feet into your skull. Another one followed and did exactly the same thing, only louder. It's difficult to say exactly what the people on the surface of the planet were doing now, because they didn't really know what they were doing themselves. None of it made a lot of sense. Running into houses, running out of houses, howling noiselessly at the noise. All around the world, the city streets exploded with people. Cars skidded into each other as the noise fell on them, and they rolled off like a tidal wave over hills and valleys, deserts and oceans, seeming to flatten everything it hit. Only one man stood and watched the sky, stood with terrible sadness in his eyes and rubbed bongs in his ears. He knew exactly what was happening, and had known ever since his sub-ether sensomatic had started winking in the dead of night beside his pillow and wakened him with a start. It was what he had waited for all these years, but when he had deciphered the signal pattern sitting alone in his small dark room, a coldness had gripped him and squeezed his heart. Of all the races in all of the galaxy who could have come and said a big hello to planet Earth, he thought, didn't it just have to be the Vogons? Still, he knew what he had to do. As the Vogon craft screamed through the air high above him, he opened his satchel. He threw away a copy of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. He threw away a copy of Godspell. He wouldn't need them where he was going. Everything was ready. Everything prepared. He knew where his towel was. A sudden silence hit the earth. If anything, it was worse than the noise. For a while, nothing happened. The great ships hung motionless in the sky over every nation on Earth. Motionless they hung, huge, heavy, steady in the sky, a blasphemy against nature. Many people went straight into shock as their minds tried to encompass what they were looking at. The ships hung in the sky in much the same way that bricks don't. And still, nothing happened. Then there was a slight whisper, a sudden spacious whisper of open ambient sound. Every hi-fi set in the world, every radio, every television, every cassette recorder, every woofer, every tweeter, every mid-range driver in the world quietly turned itself on. Every tin can, every dustbin, every window, every car, every wine glass, every sheet of rusty metal became activated as an acoustically perfect sounding board. Before the Earth passed away, it was going to be treated to the very ultimate in sound reproduction, the greatest public address system ever built. But there was no concert, no music, no fanfare, just a simple message. "People of Earth, your attention please," a voice said. And it was wonderful. Wonderful, perfect quadraphonic sound with distortion levels so low as to make a brave man weep. This is Prostetnik Vogon Jeltz of the Galactic Hyperspace Planning Council, the voice continued. As you will no doubt be aware, the plans for development of the outlying regions of the galaxy require the building of a hyperspatial express route through your star system. And, regrettably, your planet is one of those scheduled for demolition. The process will take slightly less than 2 of your Earth minutes. Thank you. The PA died away. Uncomprehending horror settled on the watching people of Earth. The terror moved slowly through the gathered crowds as if they were iron fillings on a sheet of board, and the magnet was moving beneath them. Panic sprouted again, desperate, fleeing panic, but there was nowhere to flee to. Observing this, the Vogons turned on their PA again. It said, "There's no point in acting all surprised about it. All the planning charts and demolition orders have been on display in your local planning department in Alpha Centauri for 50 of your Earth years, so you've had plenty of time to lodge any formal complaint, and it's far too late to start making a fuss about it now." The PA felt silent again, and its echo drifted across the land. The huge ships turned slowly in the sky with easy power. On the underside of each, a hatchway opened, an empty black square. By this time, somebody somewhere must have manned a radio transmitter, located a wavelength, and broadcast a message back to the Vogon ships to plead on the behalf of the planet. Nobody ever heard what they said. They only heard the reply. The PA slammed back into life again. The voice was annoyed. It said, "What do you mean you've never been to Alpha Centauri? For heaven's sake, mankind, it's only 4 light years away, you know. I'm sorry, but if you can't be bothered to take an interest in local affairs, that's your own lookout. Energize the demolition beams." Light poured out of the hatchways. "I don't know," said the voice on the PA. "Apathetic bloody planet. I have no sympathy at all." It cut off. There was a terrible ghastly silence. There was a terrible ghastly noise. There was a terrible ghastly silence. The Vogon constructor fleet coasted away into the inky starry void. Right, let's take a short break and pause. Oy. Eey. Big ol' stretcherinos. Ouch. I would appreciate if you didn't try to distract me like that. That really spazzed my brain out for a bit. But welcome, Raiders. Hi, how are you doing? Hope you're enjoying my reading. How's my reading so far? How's the audio? How's the sound? How's everything? And also, hi, Rico Clone. How you doing? It's good. Good, thank you. Let me have a swig of water before I continue. The way this book is written, it's like, you're doing good, sounds good. Also, thank you. The way this book is written, it's got like lots of like repetition and stuff, but it's like it's not annoying in the way that a lot of it can be. It's like, I don't know how to word it, but I guess it's kind of hard to read it out loud. Now that I look at it, it's got lots of like that kind of stuff in it, huh? But it's fun. It's a fun book so far. How far am I through it actually? Let's see. I don't know, honestly. There is like somewhere a thing on this thing that tracks it, but I'm not sure. Doesn't matter. We'll keep reading. Seems tricky. Yeah, it is a little bit. Anyway, let's continue. I'll read every chapter at least, I think. Far away on the opposite spiral arm of the galaxy, 500,000 light-years from the star's soul, Zaphod Bibelbrox, president of the Imperial Galactic Government, sped across the seas of Damogran, his ion-drive delta boat winking and flashing in the Damogran sun. Damogran the hot, Damogran the remote, Damagran, the almost totally unheard of. Damagran, secret home of the Heart of Gold. The boat sped on across the water. It would be some time before it reached its destination because Damagran is such an inconveniently arranged planet. It consists of nothing but middling to large desert islands separated by very pretty but annoyingly wide stretches of ocean. The boat sped on. Because of this topographical awkwardness, Damagran was always remained a deserted planet. This is why the Imperial Galactic Government chose Damagran for the Heart of Gold project. Because it was so deserted and the Heart of Gold project was so secret. The boat zipped and skipped across the sea that lay between the main islands of the only archipelago of any useful size on the whole planet. Zaphod Beeblebrox was on his way from the tiny spaceport on Easter Island. The name was an entirely meaningless coincidence. In galactic speak, Easter means small, flat, and light brown, to the Heart of Gold Island, which by another meaningless coincidence was called France. One of the side effects of work on the Heart of Gold was a whole string of pretty meaningless coincidences. But it was not in any way a coincidence that day. The day of culmination of the project, the great day of unveiling, the day that the Heart of Gold was finally to be introduced to a marveling galaxy, was also a great day of culmination for Zaphod Beeblebrox. It was for the sake of this day that he had first decided to run for the presidency, a decision that had sent shockwaves of astonishment throughout the Imperial Galaxy. Zaphod Beeblebrox, president? Not the Zaphod Beeblebrox, not the president. Many had seen it as clinching proof that the whole of known creation had finally gone bananas. Zaphod grinned and gave the boat an extra kick of speed. Zaphod Beeblebrox, adventurer, ex-hippie, good timer, crook? Quite possibly. Manic, self-publicist, terribly bad at personal relationships, often thought to be completely out to lunch. President? No one had gone bananas, not in that way at least. Only 6 people in the entire galaxy understood the principle on which the galaxy was governed, and they knew that once Zaphod Beeblebrox had announced his intention to run as president, it was more or less a fait accompli. He was ideal presidency fodder. What they completely failed to understand was why Zaphod was doing it. He banked sharply, shooting a wild wall of water at the sun. Today was the day. Today was the day when they would realize that Zaphod had been up to. Today was what Zaphod Beeblebrox's presidency was all about. Today was also his 200th birthday, but that was just another meaningless coincidence. As he skipped his boat across the seas of Damagran, he smiled quietly to himself about what a wonderful, exciting day it was going to be. He relaxed and spread his 2 arms lazily along the seat back. He steered with an extra arm he'd recently had fitted just beneath his right one to help improve his keyboxing. Hey, he cooed to himself, you're a real cool boy, you. But his nerves sang a song shriller than a dog whistle. The island of France was about 20 miles long, 5 miles across the middle, sandy and crescent-shaped. In fact, it seemed to exist not so much as an island in its own right, as simply a means of defining the sweep and curve of a huge bay. This impression was heightened by the fact that the inner coastline of the crescent consisted almost entirely of steep cliffs. From the top of the cliff, the land sloped slowly down 5 miles to the opposite shore. On top of the cliffs stood a reception committee. It consisted in large part of the engineers and researchers who had built the Heart of Gold, mostly humanoid, but here and there were a few reptiloid atom miners, who 2 or 3 green sylph-like Maxima Galacticians, an octopodic physiculturalist, or 2, and a huluvu. A huluvu is a super intelligent shade of the color blue. All except the huluvu were resplendent in their multicolored ceremonial lab coats. The huluvu had been temporarily refracted into a freestanding prism for the occasion. Alright then. There was a mood of immense excitement thrilling through all of them. Together and between them, they had gone through and beyond the furthest limits of physical laws, restructured the fundamental fabric of matter, strained, twisted, and broken the laws of possibility and impossibility, but still, the greatest excitement of all seemed to be to meet a man with an orange sash round his neck. An orange sash being what the President of the Galaxy traditionally wore. It might not even have made much difference to them if they'd known exactly how much power the President of the Galaxy actually wielded. None at all. Only 6 people in the galaxy knew that the job of the Galactic President was not to wield power, but to attract attention away from it. Zaphod Beeblebrox was amazingly good at his job. The crowd gasped, dazzled by sun and seamanship, as the presidential speedboat zipped around the headland into the bay. It flashed and shone as it came skating over the sea in wide skidding turns. In fact, it didn't need to touch the water at all, because it was supported on a hazy cushion of ionized atoms. But just for effect, it was fitted with thin fin blades which could be lowered into the water. They slashed sheets of water hissing into the air, carved deep gashes in the sea, which swayed crazily and sank back foaming in the boat's wake as it careered across the bay. Zaphod loved effect. It was what he was best at. He twisted the wheel sharply. The boat skidded round in a wild, scything skid beneath the cliff face and dropped to rest slightly on the rock waves. Within seconds, he ran out onto the deck and waved and grinned at over 3 billion people. The 3 billion people weren't actually there, but he watched his every gesture through the eyes of a small robot 3D camera, which hovered obsequiously in the air nearby. The antics of the president always made amazingly popular 3D. That's what they were for. He grinned again. 3,000,006 people didn't know it, but today would be a bigger antic than anyone had bargained for. The robot camera homed in for a close-up on the more popular of his 2 heads, and he waved again. He was roughly humanoid in appearance, except for the extra head and 3rd arm. His fair, tousled hair stuck out in random directions. His blue eyes glinted with something completely unidentifiable, and his chins were almost always unshaven. A 20-foot-high transparent globe floated next to his boat, rolling and bobbing, glistening in the brilliant sun. Inside it floated a wide semicircular sofa, upholstered in glorious red leather. The more the globe bobbed and rolled, the more the sofa stayed perfectly still, steady as an upholstered rock. Again, all done for effect as much as anything. Zaphod stepped through the wall of the globe and relaxed on the sofa. He spread his 2 arms along the back and with the 3rd brushed some dust off his knee. His head looked about, smiling. He put his feet up. At any moment he thought he might scream. Water boiled up beneath the bubble. It seethed and spouted. The bubble surged into the air, bobbing and rolling on the water spout. Up it climbed, throwing stilts of light at the cliff. Up it surged on the jet, the water falling from beneath it, crashing back into the sea hundreds of feet below. Zaphod smiled, picturing himself. A thoroughly ridiculous form of transport, but a thoroughly beautiful one. At the top of the cliff, the globe wavered for a moment, tipped into a railed ramp, rolled down it to a small concave platform, and riddled to a halt. To tremendous applause, Zaphod Beeblebrox stepped out of the bubble, his orange sash blazing in the light. The President of the Galaxy had arrived. He waited for the applause to die down, then raised his hand in greeting. "Hi," he said. A government spider sidled up to him and attempted to press a copy of his prepared speech into his hands. Pages 3 to 7 of the original version were at the moment floating soggily on the Demogran Sea some 5 miles out from the bay. Pages 1 and 2 had been salvaged by a Demogran frond-crested eagle and had already become incorporated into an extraordinarily new form of nest, which the eagle had invented. It was constructed largely of papier-mâché, and it was virtually impossible for a newly hatched baby eagle to break out of it. The Damogran frond crested eagle had heard of the notion of survival of the species, but wanted no truck with it. Zaphod Beeblebrox would not be needing his set speech, and he gently deflected the one being offered to him by the spider. "Hi," he said again. Everyone beamed at him, or at least nearly everyone. He singled out Trillian from the crowd. Trillian was a girl that Zaphod had picked out recently while visiting a planet, just for fun, incognito. She was slim, darkish, humanoid, with long waves of black hair, a full mouth, an odd little knob of a nose, and ridiculously brown eyes. With her red head scarf knotted in that particular way and her long, flowing, silky brown dress, she looked vaguely Arabic. Not that anyone there had ever heard of an Arab, of course. The Arabs had very recently ceased to exist. And when they had existed, they were 500,000 light years from Damogran. Trillian wasn't anybody in particular, or so Zaphod claimed. She just went around with him rather a lot and told him what she thought of him. "Hi, honey," he said to her. She flashed him a quick, tight smile and looked away. Then she looked back for a moment and smiled more warmly, but by this time he was looking at something else. "Hi," he said to small knot of creatures from the press who were standing nearby, wishing that he would stop saying hi and get on with the quotes. He grinned at them, particularly because he knew that in a few moments he would be giving them one hell of a quote. The next thing he said, though, was not a lot of use to them. I lost track, hold on. One of the officials of the party had irritably decided that the president was clearly not in the mood to read the deliciously turned speech that had been written for him, and had flipped the speech on the remote control device in his pocket. The switch, even. Anyway, in front of them, a huge white dome that bulged against the sky cracked down the middle, split and slowly folded itself down into the ground. Everyone gasped, although they had known perfectly well it was going to do that because they'd built it that way. Beneath it lay uncovered a huge starship, 150 meters long, shaped like a sleek running shoe, perfectly white and mind-bogglingly beautiful. At the heart of it, unseen, lay a small gold box which carried within it the most brain-wrenching device ever conceived. A device that made the starship unique in the history of the galaxy. A device after which the ship had been named. The Heart of Gold. "Wow," said Zaphod Beeblebrox to the Heart of Gold. There wasn't much else he could say. He said it again because he knew it would annoy the press. "Wow." The crowd turned their faces back toward him expectantly. He winked at Trillian, who raised her eyebrows and widened her eyes at him. She knew what he was about to say and thought him a terrible show-off. "That is really amazing," he said. "That really is truly amazing. That is so amazingly amazing, I think I'd like to steal it." A marvelous presidential quote. Absolutely true to form. The crowd laughed appreciatively. The newsmen gleefully punched buttons on their sub-ether newsmatics, and the president grinned. As he grinned, his heart screamed unbearably, and he fingered a small paralysmomatic bomb that nestled quietly in his pocket. Finally, he could bear it no more. He lifted his heads up to the sky, let out a wild whoop in major thirds, threw the bomb to the ground, and ran forward through the sea of suddenly frozen, beaming smiles. The term imperial is kept, though. Wait, what? This book has a weird bit in it. Hold on. Huh? Let me take a little break because I'm confused. Oh, there's a footnote. All right. I see. There's a big ass footnote. And the chapter. I don't suppose I'll keep reading for too much longer because my throat is like giving out, but I'll do several more chapters. But hold on, let me read this footnote because it's kinda long and it's probably important in some way. Hey there, Ari Boops, thank you for the lurk. The term President, full title, President of the Imperial Galactic Government. The term Imperial is kept, though it is now an anachronism. The hereditary emperor is nearly dead and had been for many centuries. In the last moments of his dying coma, he was locked in a stasis field which keeps him in a state of perpetual unchangingness. All his heirs are now long dead, and this means that without any drastic political upheaval, power has simply and effectively moved a rung or two down the ladder, and is now seemed to be vested in a body that used to act simply as advisors to the emperor. An elected governmental assembly headed by a president, elected by that assembly. In fact, it vests in no such place. The president in particular is very much a figurehead. He wields no real power whatsoever. He is apparently chosen by the government, but the qualities he is required to display are not those of leadership, but those of finely judged outrage. For this reason, the president is always a controversial choice, always an infuriating but fascinating character. His job is not to wield power, but to draw attention away from it. On those criteria, Zephod Beeblebrox is one of the most successful presidents the galaxy has ever had. He has already spent 2 of his 10 presidential years in prison for fraud. Very few people realize that the president and the government have virtually no power at all, and of those few people, only 6 know whence ultimate political power is wielded. Most of the others secretly believe that the ultimate decision-making process is handled by a computer. They couldn't be more wrong. Well, there you go. That's a long-ass footnote. It just kind of popped at the end there for some reason. Like, that's usually where the footnotes go, but usually they're not that long. That's like a full-ass page footnote. And yeah, I suppose this book isn't so long. Maybe eventually I'll get through it, maybe in 2 readings or so. I'd say 3 maybe? I don't know. It's like 200 pages long, so it's pretty short. But maybe it's a bit long to read out loud in a single read, isn't it? But I'll get through as much as I can. Since I quite illicitly acquired this book, it doesn't seem to have the page display that normal ebooks have on the Kindle. So we're just gonna have to like deal with it. It says page 62 on this bookmark, but I'm not sure it is page 62, or it could be actually. Huh? Is it really page 62? Did I read that many pages already? That's weird. It says it's got 1,000 pages because this is like all the books in one, so I don't know. Anyway, let's just keep on reading. Prostetnik Vogon Jeltz was not a pleasant sight, even for other Vogons. His highly domed nose rose high above a small piggy forehead. His dark green rubbery skin was thick enough for him to play the game of Vogon civil service politics, and play it well, and waterproof enough for him to survive indefinitely at sea depths of down to 1,000 feet with no ill effects. Not that he ever went swimming, of course. His busy schedule would not allow it. He was the way he was because billions of years ago, when the Vogons had first crawled out of the sluggish primeval seas of Vogsphere, and had lain panting and heaving on the planet's virgin shores, when the first rays of the bright young Vogsol sun had shone across them that morning, it was as if the forces of evolution had simply given up on them there and then, had turned aside in disgust and written them off as an ugly and unfortunate mistake. They never evolved again. They should never have survived. The fact that they did is some kind of tribute to the thick-willed, slug-brained stubbornness of these creatures. Evolution, they said to themselves, who needs it? And what nature refused to do for them, they simply did without until such time as they were able to rectify the gross anatomical inconveniences with surgery. Meanwhile, the natural forces on the planet Vogsphere had been working overtime to make up for their earlier blunder. They brought forth scintillating jeweled scuttling crabs, which the Vogons ate, smashing their shells with iron mallets, tall aspiring trees of breathtaking slenderness and color, which the Vogons cut down and burnt the crab meat with, elegant gazelle-like creatures with silken coats and dewy eyes, which the Vogons would catch and sit on. They were no use as transport because their backs would snap instantly, but the Vogons sat on them anyway. Thus the planet Vogsphere whiled away the unhappy millennia until the Vogons suddenly discovered the principles of interstellar travel. Within a few short Vog years, every last Vogon had migrated to the Megabrantis cluster, the political hub of the galaxy, and now formed the immensely powerful backbone of the Galactic Civil Service. They have attempted to acquire learning, they have attempted to acquire style and social graces, but in most respects, the modern Vogon is little different from his primitive forebears. Every year they import 27,000 scintillating jeweled scuttling crabs from their native planet and while away a happy drunken night smashing them to bits with iron mallets. Prosthetic Vogon Jeltz was a fairly typical Vogon in that he was thoroughly vile. Also, he did not like hitchhikers. Somewhere in a small dark cabin buried deep in the intestines of prosthetic Vogon Jeltz's flagship, a small match flared nervously. The owner of the match was not a Vogon, but he knew all about them and was right to be nervous. His name was Ford Prefect. He looked about the cabin but could see very little. Strange monstrous shadows loomed and leaped with the tiny flickering flame, but all was quiet. He breathed a silent thank you to the Dentrosis. The Dentrosis are an unruly tribe of gourmands, a wild but pleasant bunch whom the Vogons had recently taken to employing as catering staff on their long-haul fleets, on the strict understanding that they keep themselves very much to themselves. This suited the Dentrosis fine, because they loved Vogon money, which is one of the hardest currencies in space, but loathed the Vogons themselves. The only sort of Vogon and Dentrosi liked to see was an annoyed Vogon. It was because of this tiny piece of information that Ford Prefect was not now a whiff of hydrogen, ozone, and carbon monoxide. He heard a slight groan. By the light of the match, he saw a heavy shape moving slightly on the floor. Quickly, he shook the match out, reached in his pocket, found what he was looking for, and took it out. He ripped it open and shook it. He crouched on the floor. The shape moved at the end. Ford Prefect said, "I bought some peanuts." Arthur Dent moved and groaned again, muttering incoherently. "Here, have some," urged Ford, shaking the packet again. "If you've never been through a matter transference beam before, you've probably lost some salt and protein. The beer you had should have cushioned your system a bit." Said Arthur Dent. He opened his eyes. "It's dark," he said. "Yes," said Ford Prefect. "It's dark." "No light," said Arthur Dent. "Dark. No light." One of the things Ford Prefect had always found hardest to understand about humans was their habit of continually stating and repeating the very, very obvious. As in, "It's a nice day," or "You're very tall," or "Oh dear, you seem to have fallen down a 30-foot well. Are you all right?" At first, Ford had formed a theory to account for this strange behavior. If human beings don't keep exercising their lips, he thought, their mouths probably seize up. After a few months' consideration and observation, he abandoned this theory in favor of a new one. If they don't keep on exercising their lips, he thought, their brains start working. After a while, he abandoned this one as well, as being obstructively cynical, and decided he quite liked human beings after all. But he always remained desperately worried about the terrible number of things they didn't know about. "Yes," he agreed with Arthur. "No light." He helped Arthur to some peanuts. "How do you feel?" he asked him. "Like a military academy," said Arthur. "Bits of me keep on passing out." Ford stared at him blankly in the darkness. "If I ask you where the hell we were," said Arthur weakly, "would I regret it?" Ford stood up. "We're safe," he said. "Oh, good," said Arthur. "We're in a small galley cabin," said Ford. In one of the spaceships of the Vogon constructor fleet. Ah, said Arthur. This is obviously some strange usage of the word safe that I wasn't previously aware of. Ford struck another match to help him search for a light switch. Monstrous shadows leaped and loomed again. Arthur struggled to his feet and hugged himself apprehensively. Hideous alien shapes seemed to throng about him. The air was thick with musty smells which settled into his lungs without identifying themselves, and the low, irritating hum kept his brain from focusing. "How did we get here?" he asked, shivering slightly. "We hitched a lift," said Ford. "Excuse me?" said Arthur. "Are you trying to tell me that we just stuck out our thumbs and some green bug-eyed monster stuck his head out and said, 'Hi, fellas, hop right in. I can take you as far as the Basingstone roundabout'?" "Well," said Ford, "the thumb's an electronic sub-ether signaling device. The roundabout's at Bernard Star 6 light-years away, but otherwise, that's more or less right." "And the bug-eyed monster?" "Is green, yes." "Fine," said Arthur. "When can I go home?" "You can't," said Ford Prefect, and found the light switch. "Shade your eyes," he said, and turned it on. Even Ford was surprised. "Good grief," said Arthur. "Is this really the interior of a flying saucer?" Prosthetic Vogon Jeltz heaved his unpleasant green body round the control bridge. He always felt vaguely irritable after demolishing populated planets. He wished that someone would come and tell him that it was all wrong so that he could shout at them and feel better. He flopped as heavily as he could onto his control seat in the hope that it would break and give him something to be genuinely angry about. But it only gave a complaining sort of creak. "Go away!" he shouted at the young Vogon guard who entered the bridge at that moment. The guard vanished immediately, feeling rather relieved. He was glad it wouldn't now be him who delivered the report they just received. The report was an official release which said that a wonderful new form of spaceship drive was at this moment being unveiled at the government research base on Damogran, which would henceforth make all hyperspatial express routes unnecessary. Another door slid open, but this time the Vogon's captain didn't shout because it was the door from the galley quarters where the Dentrices prepared his meals. A meal would be most welcome. A huge furry creature bounded through the door with his lunch tray. It was grinning like a maniac. Prosthetic Vogon Jeltz was delighted. He knew that when a Dentrasi looked that pleased with himself, there was something going on somewhere on the ship that he could get very angry indeed about. Ford and Arthur stared around them. "Well, what do you think?" said Ford. "It's a bit squalid, isn't it?" Ford frowned at the grubby mattresses, unwashed cups, and unidentifiable bits of smelly alien underwear that lay around the cramped cabin. "Well, this is a working ship, you see," said Ford. "There are Dentrasi's sleeping quarters." "I thought you said they were called Vogons or something." "Yes," said Ford. "The Vogons run the ship, the Dentrasis are the cooks. They let us on board." "I'm confused," said Arthur. "Here, have a look at this," said Ford. He sat down on one of the mattresses and rummaged about in his satchel. Arthur prodded the mattress nervously and then sat on it himself. In fact, he had very little to be nervous about because all mattresses grown in the swamps of Scornshelluzita are very thoroughly killed and dried before being put to service. Very few have ever come to life again. Ford had handed the book to Arthur. "What is it?" asked Arthur. "The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's a sort of electronic book. It tells you everything you need to know about anything. That's its job." Arthur turned it over nervously in his hands. "I like the cover," he said. "Don't panic. It's the first helpful or intelligible thing anyone said to me all day." "I'll show you how it works," said Ford. He snatched it from Arthur, who was still holding it as if it were a 2-week dead lark, and pulled it out of its cover. "You press this button here, you see, and the screen lights up, giving you the index." A screen about 3 inches by 4 lit up, and characters began to flicker across the surface. "You want to know about Vogons, so I entered that name so." His fingers tapped some more keys, and there we are. The words Vogon Constructor Fleets flared in green across the screen. Ford pressed a large red button at the bottom of the screen, and the words began to undulate across it. At the same time, the book began to speak the entry as well in a still, quiet, measured voice. This is what the book said. Vogon Constructor Fleets. Here is what you do if you want to get a lift from a Vogon. Forget it. They are one of the most unpleasant races in the galaxy. Not actually evil, but bad-tempered, bureaucratic, officious, and callous. They wouldn't even lift a finger to save their own grandmothers from the ravenous bug-bladder beast of Trowel, without orders signed in triplicate, sent in, sent back, queried, lost, found, subjected to public inquiry, lost again, and finally buried in soft peat for 3 months and recycled as firelighters. The best way to get a drink out of a Vogon is to stick your finger down his throat, and the best way to irritate him is to feed his grandmother to the ravenous bug-bladder beast of Trowel. On no account allow a Vogon to read poetry at you. Arthur blinked at it. What a strange book. How did we get a lift then? That's the point. It's out of date now, said Ford, sliding the book back into its cover. I'm doing the field research for the new revised edition. And one of the few things I'll have to do is include a bit about how the Vogons now employ Dentrasi cooks, which gives us a rather useful little loophole. A pained expression crossed Arthur's face. But who are the Dentrasis, he said. Great guys, said Ford. They're the best cooks and the best drink mixers, and they don't give a wet slap about anything else. And they'll always help hitchhikers aboard, partly because they like the company, but mostly because it annoys the Vogons. Which is exactly the sort of thing you need to know if you're an impoverished hitchhiker trying to see the marvels of the universe for less than 30 Altarian dollars a day. And that's my job. Fun, isn't it? Arthur looked lost. It's amazing, he said, and frowned at one of the other mattresses. Unfortunately, I got stuck on the Earth for rather longer than I intended, said Ford. I came for a week and got stuck for 15 years. But how did you get there in the first place then? Easy. I got a lift with a teaser. A teaser? Yeah. What is... A teaser? Teasers are usually rich kids with nothing to do. They cruise around looking for planets that haven't made interstellar contact yet and buzz them. Buzz them? Arthur began to feel that Ford was enjoying making life difficult for him. Yeah, said Ford. They buzz them. They find some isolated spot with very few people around, then land right by some poor unsuspecting soul whom no one's ever going to believe, and then strut up and down in front of him, wearing silly antennas on their head and making beep-beep noises. Rather childish, really. Ford leaned back on the mattress with his hands behind his head and looked infuriatingly pleased with himself. Ford, insisted Arthur. I don't know if this sounds like a silly question, but what am I doing here? Well, you know that, said Ford. I rescued you from the Earth. And, what's happened to the Earth? Ah, it's been demolished. Has it? Said Arthur levelly. Yes, it just boiled away into space. Look, said Arthur, I'm a bit upset about that. Ford frowned to himself and seemed to roll the thought around his mind. Yes, I can understand that, he said at last. Understand that, shouted Arthur. Understand that! Ford sprang up. Keep looking at the book, he hissed urgently. What? Don't panic. I'm not panicking. Yes, you are. Alright, so I'm panicking. What else is there to do? You just come along with me and have a good time. The galaxy's a fun place. You'll need to have this fish in your ear. I beg your pardons? Asked Arthur, rather politely, he thought. Ford was holding up a small glass jar, which quite clearly had a small yellow fish wriggling around in it. Arthur blinked at him. He wished there was something simple and recognizable he could grasp hold of. He who would have felt safe if alongside the Dentrasi's underwear, the piles of corn-shellus mattresses, and the man from Beetlejuice holding up a small yellow fish and offering to put it in his ear, he had been able to see just a small packet of cornflakes. But he couldn't, and he didn't feel safe. Suddenly, a violent noise leaped at them from no source that he could identify. He gasped in terror at what sounded like a man trying to gargle while fighting off a pack of wolves. "Shush," said Ford. "Listen, it might be important." Important? It's the Vogon captain making an announcement on the Tannoy. You mean that's how the Vogons talk? Listen! But I can't speak Vogon. You don't need to. Just put this fish in your ear. Ford, with a lightning movement, clapped his hand to Arthur's ear, and he had the sudden sickening sensation of the fish slithering deep into his oral tract. Gasping with horror, he scrabbled at his ear for a second or so, but then slowly turned goggle-eyed with wonder. He was experiencing the oral equivalent of looking at a picture of two black silhouetted faces and suddenly seeing as a picture of a white candlestick, or of looking at a lot of colored dots on a piece of paper which suddenly resolve themselves into the figure 6 and mean that your optician is going to charge you a lot of money for a new pair of glasses. He was still listening to the howling gargles. He knew that only now it had somehow taken on the semblance of perfectly straightforward English. This is what he heard. Ford Prefect's original name is the only pronounceable in an obscure Betelgeusian dialect, now virtually extinct. This is a footnote, by the way. Ford Prefect's original name is only pronounceable in an obscure Betelgeusian dialect, now virtually extinct since the Great Collapsing Hrung disaster of Galcid year 03758, which wiped out all the old Praxi-Beetle communities on Betelgeuse 7. Ford's father was the only man on the entire planet to survive the Great Collapsing Hrung disaster, by an extraordinary coincidence that he was never able to satisfactorily explain. The whole episode is shrouded in deep mystery. In fact, no one ever knew what a Hrung was, nor why it had chosen to collapse on Betelgeuse 7 particularly. Ford's father, magnanimously waving aside the clouds of suspicion that had inevitably settled around him, came to live on Betelgeuse 5, where he both fathered and uncled Ford. In memory of his now dead race, he christened him in the ancient Praxi-Beetle tongue. Because Ford never learned to say his original name, his father eventually died of shame, which is still a terminal disease in some parts of the galaxy. The other kids at school nicknamed him Ix, which in the language of Betelgeuse 5 translates to as boy who's not able to satisfactorily to explain what a Hrung is, nor why it should choose to collapse on Betelgeuse 7. What? That's a strange place to put that footnote, but okay. Why is that there? Terminal shame. Maybe that's the end of the chapter, so I can respond to you now a bit. Huh. I don't really understand why that footnote was there. Maybe it's because it's a weirdly formatted ebook that it's like not really in the place it should be. I don't know. But anyway, hi username, how you doing? Hello everybody that came in. Hi Hattie as well. 25 stream streak, nice. Yeah, all these cosmic words are the worst, but also the best. I feel like maybe reading these books will help me not get so tongue-tied a lot when I read stuff eventually. And also, yeah, I've been wanting to read this book for a long time, username, so I finally got a chance to. Maybe if I keep doing these reading streams, I get to read more books. Lots of books. Let's see. Something about this writing you're reading this music combined gives you vibes on an old point-and-click adventure game. I feel like a lot of those point-and-clicks were probably inspired by this kind of writing. I feel like this book in particular probably inspired a lot of people. So that's but yeah, I definitely see the vision. Okay, I think I got like at least one more chapter in me, and then we can maybe wrap up for today. Anyway, so this is what they heard when they put the babblefish in their ears. Maybe I just should skip those footnotes because they're kind of distracting, but yeah, I don't know. Chapter 6. Hold on, I got a burp coming. Now it's gone. Chapter 6. Howl, bowl, gargle, howl, howl, gargle, howl, gargle, howl, gargle, howl, gargle, howl, slurp, ark. Should have a good time. Message repeats. This is your captain speaking, so stop whatever you're doing and pay attention. First of all, I see from our instruments that we have a couple of hitchhikers aboard. Hello, wherever you are. I just wanted to make it totally clear that you are not at all welcome. I worked hard to get where I am today, and I didn't become a captain of a Vogon constructor ship simply so I could turn it into a taxi service for a load of degenerate freeloaders. I have sent out a search party, and as soon as they find you, I will put you off the ship. If you're very lucky, I might read you some of my poetry first. Secondly, we are about to jump into hyperspace for the journey to Bernard's star. On arrival, we will stay in dock for a 72-hour refit, and no one should leave the ship during that time. I repeat, all planet leave is cancelled. I've just had an unhappy love affair, so don't see why anybody else should have a good time. Message ends. The noise stopped. Arthur discovered to his embarrassment that he was lying curled up in a small ball on the floor with his arms wrapped around his head. He smiled weakly. Charming man, he said. I wish I had a daughter so I could forbid her to marry one. You wouldn't need to, said Ford. They've got as much sex appeal as a road accident. No, don't move. He added as Arthur began to uncurl himself. You'd better be prepared for the jump into hyperspace. It's unpleasantly like being drunk. What's so unpleasant about being drunk? You ask a glass of water. Arthur had thought about this. Ford, he said. Yeah? What's this fish doing in my ear? It's translating for you. It's a babblefish. Look it up in the book if you like. He tossed over the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and then curled himself into a fetal ball to prepare himself for the jump. At that moment, the bottom fell out of Arthur's mind. His eyes turned inside out. His feet began to leak out of the top of his head. The room folded flat around him, spun around, shifted out of existence, and left him sliding into his own navel. They were passing through hyperspace. The babblefish, said the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy quietly, is small, yellow, and leech-like, and probably the oddest thing in the universe. It feeds on the brainwave energy received not from its own carrier but from those around it. It absorbs all unconscious mental frequencies from this brainwave energy to nourish itself with. It then exacts into the mind of its carrier a telepathic matrix formed by combining the conscious thought frequencies with nerve signals picked up from the speech centers of the brain which has supplied them. The practical upshot of all this is that if you stick a babblefish into your ear, you can instantly understand anything said to you in any form of language. The speech patterns you actually hear decode the brainwave matrix which has been fed into your mind by your babblefish. Now, it is such a bizarrely improbable coincidence that anything so mind-bogglingly useful could have evolved purely by chance that some thinkers have chosen to see it as a final and clinching proof of the non-existence of God. The argument goes something like this. I refuse to prove that I exist, says God, for proof denies faith, and without faith I am nothing. But, says man, the babblefish is a dead giveaway, isn't it? It could not have evolved by chance, it proves you exist, and so furthermore, by your own arguments, you don't. QED. Oh dear, says God. I hadn't thought of that, and then promptly vanishes in a puff of logic. Oh, that was easy, says man, and for an encore goes on to prove that black is white and gets himself killed on the next zebra crossing. Most leading theologians claim that this argument is a load of dingo's kidneys, but that didn't stop Ulan Kulifid making a small fortune when he used it as the central theme of his best-selling book. Well, that about wraps it up for God. Meanwhile, the poor babblefish, by effectively removing all barriers to communication between different races and cultures, has caused more and bloodier wars than anything else in the history of creation. Arthur let out a low groan. He was horrified to discover that the kick through hyperspace hadn't killed him. He was now 6 light years from the place that the Earth would have been if it still existed. The Earth. Visions of it swam sickeningly through his nauseated mind. There was no way his imagination could feel the impact of the whole Earth having gone. It was too big. He prodded his feelings by thinking that his parents and his sister had gone. No reaction. He thought of all the people he had been close to. No reaction. Then he thought of a complete stranger he had been standing behind in the queue at the supermarket 2 days before and felt a sudden stab. The supermarket was gone. Everyone in it was gone. Nelson's column was gone. Nelson's column had gone and there would be no outcry, because there was no one left to make an outcry. From now on, Nelson's column only existed in his mind. England only existed in his mind. His mind, stuck there in this dank, smelly, steel-lined spaceship. A wave of claustrophobia closed in on him. England no longer existed. He'd got that somehow. He got it. He tried again. America, he thought, has gone. He couldn't grasp it. He decided to start smaller again. New York was gone. No reaction. He'd never seriously believed it existed anyway. The dollar, he thought, has sunk forever. Slight tremor there. Every Bogart movie has been wiped, he said to himself, and that gave him a nasty shock. McDonald's, he thought. There's no longer any such thing as a McDonald's hamburger. He passed out. When he came round a second later, he found he was sobbing for his mother. He jerked himself violently to his feet. Ford! Ford looked up from where he was sitting in a corner humming to himself. He always found the actual traveling through hyperspace part of space travel rather trying. Yeah, he said. If you're a researcher on this book thing and you were on Earth, you must have been gathering material on it. Well, I was able to extend the original entry a bit, yes. Let me see what it says in this edition then. I got to see it. Yeah, okay. He passed it over again. Arthur grabbed hold of it and tried to stop his hands shaking. He pressed the entry for the relevant page. The screen flashed and swirled and resolved into a page of print. Arthur stared at it. It doesn't have an entry, he burst out. Ford looked over his shoulder. Yes, it does, he said. Down there, see, at the bottom of the screen, just above Eccentrica Galumpitz, the triple-breasted whore of Eroticon 6. Arthur followed Ford's finger and saw where it was pointing. For a moment, it still didn't register. Then his mind nearly blew up. What? Harmless? Is that it's all got to say? Harmless. One word. Ford shrugged. Well, there are 100 billion stars in the galaxy, and only a limited amount of space in the book's microprocessors, he said. And no one knew much about the Earth, of course. Well, for God's sake, I hope you managed to rectify that a bit. Oh yes, well, I managed to transmit a new entry off to the editor. He had to trim it a bit, but it's still an improvement. And what does it say now? Asked Arthur. Mostly harmless, admitted Ford with a slightly embarrassed cough. Mostly harmless, shouted Arthur. What was that noise? Hissed Ford. It was me shouting, shouted Arthur. No, shut up, said Ford. I think we're in trouble. You think we're in trouble? Outside the door were the clear sounds of marching footsteps. Ledentrasis? Whispered Arthur. No, those are steel-tipped boots, said Ford. There was a sharp ringing rap on the door. Then, who is it? Said Arthur. Well, said Ford, if we're lucky, it's just the Vogons come to throw us into space. And if we're unlucky? If we're unlucky, said Ford grimly, the captain might be serious in his threat that he's going to read us some of his poetry first. End the chapter. How nasty is the poetry? Hey, big stretch. That was a short chapter. Big old stretcherinos. I think I got another chapter in me, because that one was really quick, so, yeah. Let's Sounds like a movie title. You mean the triple-breasted whore of Rotcon 6? Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Like some sort of Star Trek parody or something. Hmm. Don't see why anybody should have a good time. Yeah, it's like, nope, I'm miserable. You're gonna be too. Piss off, everybody. Hmm. But yeah, okay. Let me just recollect my brain and read one more chapter, and that'll be it. Wait, what? Username, you refollowed me? Wait, what? Huh. Okay then. I didn't know you unfollowed me. But whatever. Let's continue. Chapter 7. Volgan poetry is of course the third worst in the universe. The second worst is that of the Asgoths of Skria. During a recitation by their poet master Granthos, the flatulent of his poem, Ode to a small lump of green putty found in my armpit one midsummer morning, 4 of his audience died of internal hemorrhaging, and the president of the Mid-Galactic Arts Nobling Council survived by gnawing off one of his legs off. Granthos is reported to have been disappointed by the poem's reception and was about to embark on a reading of his 12-book epic entitled My Favorite Bath Time Gurgles, when his own major intestine, in a desperate attempt to save life and civilization, leaped straight up through his neck and throttled his brain. The very worst poetry of all perished along with its creator, Paula Nancy Millstone Jennings of Greenbridge, Essex, England, in the destruction of Earth. Prosthetic Vogon Jelt smiled very slowly. This was done not so much for the effect as because he was trying to remember the sequence of muscle movements. He had had a terribly therapeutic yell at his prisoners and was now feeling quite relaxed and ready for a little callousness. The prisoners sat in poetry appreciation chairs, strapped in. Vogon suffered no illusions as to the regard their works were generally held in. Their early attempts at composition had been part of a bludgeoning insistence that they be accepted as a properly evolved and cultured race, but now the only thing that kept them going was sheer bloody-mindedness. The sweat stood out cold on Fort Prefect's brow and slid round the electrodes strapped to his temples. These were attached to a battery of electronic equipment, imagery intensifiers, rhythmic modulators, alliterative residulators, and simile dumpers, all designed to heighten the experience of the poem and make sure that not a single nuance of the poet's thought was lost. Arthur Dent sat and quivered. He had no idea what he was in for, but he knew that he hadn't liked anything that had happened so far, and didn't think things were likely to change. The Vogon began to read, a fetid little passage of his own devising. "Oh, freddled grunt boggly," he began. Spasms racked Ford's body. This was more than even he'd been prepared for. "Thy micturations are to me as prodled gobble-glotches on a lurgid bee." "Gah!" went Ford Prefect, retching his head back as lumps of pain thumped through it. He could dimly see beside him Arthur lolling and rolling his seat. He clenched his teeth. "Group, I implore thee," continued the merciless Vogon, "my funting turling dromes." His voice was rising to a horrible pitch of impassioned stridency. "And hooptishly drangle me with crinkly brindle-wordles, or I will rend thee in the gobbleworts with my blurgle cruncheon. See if I don't!" cried the Fort Prefect, and threw one final spasm as the electronic enhancement of the last line caught him full blast across his temples. He went limp. Arthur lolled. "Now, Earthlings," whirred the Vogon. He didn't know that Fort Prefect was in fact from a small planet somewhere in the vicinity of Beetlejuice, and wouldn't have cared if he had. "I present you with a simple choice. Either die in the vacuum of space, or, he paused for a melodramatic effect, tell me how good you thought my poem was. He threw himself backward into a huge leathery bat-shaped seat and watched them. He did the smile again. Ford was rasping for breath. He rolled his dusty tongue round his parched mouth and moaned. Arthur said quite brightly, actually, I quite liked it. Ford turned and gaped. There was an approach that had quite simply not occurred to him. The Vogon raised a surprised eyebrow that effectively obscured his nose, and was therefore no bad thing. Oh good, he whirred, in considerable astonishment. Oh yes, said Arthur. I thought that some of the metaphysical imagery was really particularly effective. Ford continued to stare at him, slowly organizing his thoughts around this totally new concept. Were they really going to be able to bareface their way out of this? Yes, do continue, invited the Vogon. Oh, and interesting rhythmic devices too, continued Arthur, which seemed to counterpoint the he floundered. Ford leaped to his rescue, hazarding, counterpoint the surrealism of the underlying metaphor of the he floundered too, but Arthur was ready again. Humanity of the Vogonity, Ford hissed at him. Ah yes, the Vogonity, of the poet's compassionate soul. Arthur felt he was on a homestretch now, which contrives through the medium of the verse structure to sublimate this, transcend that, and come to terms with the fundamental dichotomies of the other. He was reaching a triumphant crescendo, and one is left with a profound and vivid insight into which suddenly gave out on him. Ford leaped in with a coup de grace, into whatever it was the poem was about, he yelled, out the corner of his mouth. Well done, Arthur. That was very good. The Vogon perused them. For a moment his embittered racial soul had been touched, but he thought no. Too little, too late. His voice took on the quality of a cat snagging brushed nylon. So, what you're saying is that I write poetry because underneath my mean, callous, heartless exterior, I really just want to be loved, he said. He paused. Is that right? Ford laughed a nervous laugh. Well, I mean, yes. He said, don't we all, deep down, you know, The Vogon stood up. No, well, you're completely wrong, he said. I just write poetry to throw my mean, callous, heartless exterior into sharp relief. I'm going to throw you off the ship anyway. Guard, take the prisoners to number 3 airlock and throw them out. What? Shouted Ford. A huge young Vogon guard stepped forward and yanked them out of their straps with his huge blubbery arms. You can't throw us into space, yelled Ford. We're trying to write a book. Resistance is useless, shouted the Vogon guard back at him. It was the first phrase he'd learned when he joined the Vogon Guard Corps. The captain watched with detached amusement and then turned away. Arthur stared round at him wildly. I don't want to die, he yelled. I've still got a headache. I don't want to go to heaven with a headache. I'd be all cross and wouldn't enjoy it. The guard grasped them both firmly round the neck and, bowing deferentially towards his captain's back, hoiked them both protesting out of the bridge. A steel door closed and the captain was on his own again. He hummed quietly and mused to himself, lightly fingering his notebook of verses. He said. Counterpoint the surrealism of the underlying metaphor. He considered this for a moment and then closed the book with a grim smile. That's too good for them, he said. The long steel-lined corridor echoed to the feeble struggles of the two humanoids clamped firmly under rubbery Vogon armpits. This is great, spluttered Arthur. This is really terrific. Let go of me, you brute! The Vogon guard dragged them on. Don't you worry, said Ford. I'll think of something. He didn't sound hopeful. Resistance is useless, bellowed the guard. Just don't say things like that, stammered Ford. How can anyone maintain a positive mental attitude if you're saying things like that? My God, complained Arthur. You're talking about a positive mental attitude and you haven't even had your planet demolished today. I woke up this morning and thought I'd have a nice relaxed day, do a bit of reading, brush the dog. It's now just after 4 in the afternoon and I'm already being thrown out of an alien spaceship 6 light years from the smoking remains of the Earth. He spluttered and gurgled as the Vogon tightened his grip. Alright, said Ford. Just stop panicking. Who said anything about panicking? Snapped Arthur. This is still just a culture shock. You wait till I've settled down into the situation and found my bearings. Then I'll start panicking. Arthur, you're getting hysterical. Shut up. Ford tried desperately to think, but was interrupted by the guard shouting again. Resistance is useless. And you can shut up as well, snapped Ford. Resistance is useless. Oh, give it a rest, said Ford. He twisted his head till he was looking straight up into his captor's face. A thought struck him. Do you really enjoy this sort of thing? He asked suddenly. The Vogon stopped dead and a look of immense stupidity seeped slowly over his face. Enjoy? He boomed. What do you mean? What I mean, said Ford, is does it give you a full satisfying life? Stomping around, shouting, pushing people out of spaceships? The Vogon stared up at the low steel ceiling and his eyebrows almost rolled over each other. His mouth slacked. Finally he said, Well, the hours are good. They'd have to be, agreed Ford. Arthur twisted his head round to look at Ford. Ford, what are you doing? He asked in an amazed whisper. Oh, just trying to take an interest in the world around me, okay? He said. So, the hours are pretty good then, he resumed. The Vogon stared down at him as sluggish thoughts moiled around in the murky depths. Yeah, he said. But now you come to mention it, most of the actual minutes are pretty lousy. Except, he thought again, which required looking at the ceiling. Except some of the shouting I quite like. He filled his lungs and bellowed, Resistances! Sure, yes, interrupted Ford hurriedly. You're good at that, I can tell. But if it's mostly lousy, he said, slowly giving the words time to reach their mark, then why do you do it? What is it? The girls? The leather? The machismo? Or do you just find that coming to terms with the mindless tedium of it all presents an interesting challenge? Arthur looked backward and forward between them in bafflement. Said the guard. I don't know. I think I just sort of do it, really. My aunt said that spaceship guard was a good career for a young Vogon. You know, the uniform, the low-slung stun ray holster, the mindless tedium. There you are, Arthur, said Ford with the air of someone reaching the conclusion of his argument. You think you got problems. Arthur rather thought he had. Apart from the unpleasant business with his own planet, the Vogon guard had the Vogon guard had half-throttled him already, and he didn't like the sound of being thrown into space very much. Try and understand his problem, insisted Ford. Here he is, poor lad. His entire life's work is stamping around, throwing people off spaceships. And shouting, added the guard. And shouting, sure, said Ford, patting the blubbery arm clamped around his neck in friendly condescension. And he doesn't even know why he's doing it. Arthur agreed this was very sad. He did this with a small, feeble gesture because he was too asphyxiated to speak. Deep rumblings of bemusement came from the guard. Well, now you put it like that, I suppose. Good lad, encouraged Ford. But all right, went on the rumblings. So, what's the alternative? Well, said Ford, brightly but slowly. Stop doing it, of course. Tell them, he went on, you're not going to do it anymore. He felt he ought to add something to that, but for the moment the guard seemed to have his mind occupied pondering that much. Said the guard. Well, that doesn't sound that great for me. Ford suddenly felt the moment slipping away. Now, wait a minute, he said. That's just the start, you see. There's more to it than that, you see. But, at the moment, the guard renewed his grip and continued his original purpose of lugging his prisoners to the airlock. He was obviously quite touched. "No, I think if it's all the same to you," he said, "I'd better get you both shoved into this airlock and then go and get on with some other bits of shouting I've got to do." It wasn't all the same to Ford Prefect at all. "Come on now. But look," he said, less slowly, less brightly. Said Arthur without any clear inflection. But hang on," pursued Ford. "There's music and heart and things to tell you about yet." "Resistance is useless," bellowed the guard, and then added, "You see, if I keep it up, I can eventually get promoted to senior shouting officer. And there aren't usually many vacancies for non-shouting and non-pushing people about officers, so I think I'd better stick to what I know." They had now reached the airlock. A large circular steel hatchway of massive strength and weight led into the inner skin of the craft. The guard operated the control and the hatchway swung smoothly open. "But thanks for taking an interest," said the Vogon guard. "Bye now." He flung Ford and Arthur through the hatchway into the small chamber within. Arthur lay panting for breath. Ford scrambled around and flung his shoulder uselessly against the reclosing hatchway. "But listen," he shouted to the guard. "There's a whole world you don't know anything about. Here, how about this?" Desperately, he grabbed for the only bit of culture he knew offhand. He hummed the first bar of Beethoven's Fifth. "Da-da-dum! Doesn't that stir anything in you?" "No," said the guard. "Not really. But I'll mention it to my aunt." If he said anything further after that, it was lost. The hatchway sealed itself tight, and all sound was lost except the faint, distant hum of the ship's engines. They were in a brightly polished cylindrical chamber about 6 feet in diameter and 10 feet long. Ford looked around it, panting. "Potentially bright lad, I thought," he said, and slumped against the curved wall. Arthur was still lying in the curve of the floor where he had fallen. He didn't look up. He just lay panting. "We're trapped now, aren't we?" "Yes," said Ford. "We're trapped." "Well, didn't you think of anything? I thought you said you were going to think of something. Perhaps you thought of something and I didn't notice." "Oh, yes, I thought of something," panted Ford. Arthur looked up expectantly. "But unfortunately," continued Ford, "it rather involved being on the side of this airtight hatchway. On the other side of this airtight hatchway." He kicked the hatch they'd just been thrown to. "But it was a good idea, was it?" "Oh, yes, very neat." "What was it?" "Well, I hadn't worked out the details yet. Not much point now, is there?" "So, what happens next?" asked Arthur. Well, the hatchway in front of us will open automatically in a few moments, and we will shoot out into deep space, I expect, and asphyxiate. If you take a lungful of air with you, you can last for up to 30 seconds, of course," said Ford. He stuck his hands behind his back, raised his eyebrows, and started to hum an old Beetlejuicean bell hymn. To Arthur's eyes, he suddenly looked very alien. "So, this is it," said Arthur. "We are going to die." "Yes," said Ford, "except, no, wait a minute." He suddenly leaned across the chamber at something behind Arthur's line of vision. "What's this switch?" he cried. "What? Where?" cried Arthur, twisting around. "No, I was only fooling," said Ford. "We're going to die after all." He slumped against the wall and carried on the tune from where he left off. "You know," said Arthur, "it's at times like this when I'm trapped in a Vogon airlock with a man from Beetlejuice and about to die of asphyxiation in deep space that I really wish I'd listened to what my mother told me when I was young." "Why? What did she tell you?" "I don't know. I didn't listen." "Oh," Ford carried on humming. "This is terrific," Arthur thought to himself. "Nelson's column was gone. McDonald is gone. All that's left is me and the words, 'mostly harmless.' Any second now, all that will be left is mostly harmless. And yesterday the planet seemed to be going so well." A motor whirred. A slight hiss built into a deafening roar of rushing air as the outer hatchway opened onto an empty blackness studded with tiny, impossibly bright points of light. Ford and Arthur popped into outer space like corks from a toy gun. End of chapter. Hmm. What a cliffhanger to end on, huh? For today. Hmm. There are sure a lot of words in this, huh? Hmm. I would like to keep reading, but I really should rest my voice, because I can feel it. I'm reading this very loudly and not chill at all, because I want to like actually be audible. But yeah, it's fun, this book, isn't it? If anybody wants to read it, you should find it and read it too. I ought to rest. I've been streaming. I've been like race lagooning for 5 hours and reading for 2. So yeah, I definitely ought to rest. And you can probably hear Archie in the background also going crazy there. So I gotta feed the boy. Mm-hmm. But yeah, also hello Rick, how you doing? Also, I suppose you got unfollowed by Twitch itself username? That's weird. Well, thank you for coming back. That was strange, isn't it? But hi Rick, I hope you're doing well as well. I hope you're doing good. It's been an intense day for my voice and Archie's belly. Yes, it's been a long day. And tomorrow we'll do it all over again because I gotta play Disco Elysium. And I gotta make a new schedule. And maybe, I don't know, I need to make like a reading scene specifically for like reading. And I need to adjust my model a little bit later so I could look like I'm looking downwards, I'm reading. Or something. I don't know, I have to like figure out how to present this better. In some ways. But yeah, that was fun. I'm glad I chose to read a book this time. Yeah. I will find more books to read as well. Perhaps some of the Discworld books. Perhaps something else. And there's like a whole bunch of those Hitchhiker books around, so I can read those as well. I'm glad you enjoyed the reading. I'm glad that I wasn't as tongue-tied as I would be sometimes when I do these, where I get like mixed up words and stuff, considering what all sorts of strange words there are in this book especially, huh? I need to figure out how to properly audio capture this stupid virtual machine out of which I run Windows 98 from where I get my music as well. Or perhaps just generate some tracks to play in a loop. Just like download them. Cause some of these, you know what? I'm actually going to save this one as wait, MIDI file format. I don't want a MIDI. Save as MIDI. Oh man, this doesn't save MP3s. Well, how the hell am I supposed to play these? Save as. I'll just save it and figure it out later. But yeah, nice music for reading. There you go, save. Yeah, just gonna save some music if I can get it working. I can just like, before reading, I can just like figure out which tracks I want to have beforehand, just save them and play them on a loop. Yeah. What a nifty tool that thing is, huh? It's like really simple, but it's like pretty cool. Oh, I forgot to hide my music player. I suppose the normal music player, but that's fine. That's fine. It's fine. It's not for looking at the stream anyway. It's for listening to right now. But yeah, I need to get a scene for just reading ready. Maybe I have enough inspiration in my brain to do that. Perhaps I do, perhaps I don't. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'll think about it. But yeah, big stretch, big rest. I will be coming back tomorrow, as I always do lately. I'll have a schedule ready before the next stream, but expect Disco Elysium on Monday, and some other things later, and we'll have a good time. Yes, we'll all have a very good time. What do I want to do now? I will rest. I'm getting hungry again. I should like get something quick to eat, I think. Let's go say hi to somebody. Somebody on the internet. Do 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 do. Who do we have here that I could say hi to? Every tomorrow is Mar Day. Yep. Tomorrow. Tomorrow. Yeah, that's how you spell it. Tomorrow. Thank you all for being here. Tomorrow. There you go. See you tomorrow. That's gonna be my sign off. Good morning. See you tomorrow. all the VTubers have like, you know, like sign in and sign off lines. That could be, yeah. See you tomorrow. And like every time I say tomorrow, it just pops up the spelling on the screen so people get the joke. My brain is tired. And this is exactly what I needed after like nonsense of Deadly Premonition with this garbage ass writing. And tomorrow we'll purge it some more with Disco Elysium. It's like the entire week prepares us for the trash of Deadly Premonition.